Hello and welcome. My name is Ilva Tare. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. This is Balkans Debrief. With the war in Ukraine as a backdrop, a proposed amendment of the electoral law in Bosnia and Herzegovina last week by the High Office representative set off protest and heated political rhetoric. Elections are looming and the mandate for the EU-led peacekeeping force will have to be extended this winter. Is Bosnia in crisis again? To talk about this and more, we have Adnan Huskic on the show today, a political analyst, an elections researcher, and a Christian Schwarz-Schilling professor at the Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. Adnan, thank you for joining Balkans Debrief.
Thank you for having me.
How do you expect the upcoming elections in October to unfold? And can you describe the current political climate?
Well, as far as the expectations are concerned, what we're hoping for is that we're going to have elections proper, because there were attempts to stop these elections by several political subjects from happening and conditioning, basically organizing these elections with reaching an agreement on the electoral reform, which is a process that's been going on for quite a long time and proved to be futile in the end, which means that we ended up with no deal shortly before the elections were called, which in a way puts us in a situation where we have to put it on hold. However, I think that some people were trying to extract some concessions at the very end by trying to block the organization of elections. I was primarily talking about parties that are coming from the Croat political spectrum, but other than that, all the decisions of the High Representative so far, first the one about the financing of elections, which in a way broke the deadlock in terms of financing and basically paved the way for organizing elections this autumn. And then the more recent decisions or interventions, which happened only a few weeks ago, where he intervened in some, as we call it, technical aspects dealing with the integrity of the electoral process, which were surprise to most of us, and it happened at relatively unfortunate time, I would say, because we are in the middle of electoral process, not yet campaign, but the electoral process has started already. In a way, we now know that the elections will take place, and as far as the campaign, which basically started in Bosnia, and I'm not sure that it ever really ended, because Bosnia has been in a permanent sort of crisis, which manifested itself in different ways, but it was always about basically having a campaign even without the election. So there are no differences that you can tell when the electoral process starts, and the only difference that I could see right now is that we see heavy abuse of public resources as part of the campaign, which is something that we are unfortunately also very much used to.
Adnan, as an expert in elections, how do you view the leaked proposal for amending the electoral law from the office of the High Representative Schmid?
Let me just give you a little bit of background to this story. First, the whole discussion about electoral law is part of the broader discussion that's been in place in Bosnia for almost 15, 16 years now. And that's a debate about revising the constitution of Bosnia in order to fit into, let's say, our European perspective, meaning that what we have to do as part of these reforms is that we have to change, among other things, the electoral law of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but by intervening in the constitution of BiH. There are some very famous cases, Sejdic and Finci, which means a Jew and a Roma, who were not able to run for the office. They appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, and the verdict was delivered, and several other cases followed, which are basically touching on the very essence of what Bosnia's power sharing arrangement really is. And the beginning of the process of reforming these, or attempt to reforming these, also gave birth eventually to the process of electoral reform. Now, I have to tell you very clearly, nothing happened over the course of these 15 to 16 years. So we have no results whatsoever. No constitutional amendments have been proposed, nor adopted, nor passed in parliamentary procedure. And now we, in a way, moved away from that and try to focus, especially because of very, very strong demands of Croat parties in Bosnia, on the electoral reform as such. So what we're doing is now, what have been doing with the assistance of the European Union and the United States, is to push through a number of changes to the electoral law. All these discussions actually failed in the end. And I think that the major reason why they failed was that it was a very obscure process, that the information that we got as citizens were basically information that were given to us by our politicians who took part in these negotiations. There were no official documents, or there were no official statements from either the EU and the United States, which in a way created a situation where each of them could use this and instrumentalize this for the campaign. And then when it all failed, right, what we got in the end is a very surprising move by the High Representative, Christian Schmidt, who just a few weeks ago introduced changes to the electoral law, but shied away from the whole package that he was announcing. And the whole package basically was about intervention into the constitution of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is one of the entities in Bosnia, one of the subnational units. And the other package, which he did in the end enact, so the changes to the electoral law that were enacted, dealt with were mostly concerned with the integrity of electoral process, something that everybody was objecting about. And he also gave a deadline to political parties to reach an agreement over the course of next 6 weeks. And unless they do that he would introduce these changes as well. Now, what is going to happen, I don't know. Whether he will really do that because we are now only a month before the electoral campaign proper. To do that, I think would be a gross mistake at this point, and I'm really hoping that the change of the electoral law will not be done.
You mean to impose the amendments without a political agreement among political parties?
I think that I agree fully with what this enacted decision contained in terms of the integrity of the electoral process, because it did address a number of issues: the use of hate speech, campaigns online, also something that is very endemic to Bosnia, which is trading the places in the election boards, which allows parties to establish full control over the electoral process and polling stations, and several polling stations. And all of these issues are important, that they need to be addressed. But why now is the question, right? We are in the middle. Yes, the timing is the problem, right? I mean, there was plenty of time, quite honestly, there was plenty of time to start this before we called for the elections. Now we are in the middle of electoral process, and those who are very much purists about approaching, elections as a topic, such as the OSCE, ODIHR, or other, are very much hesitant to intervene in legislation dealing with elections once the process has started. Now, the first intervention already happened. The second one would definitely be a major one.
Bosnians protesting in the streets of Sarajevo claimed that they protested segregation. What does that mean?
Well, I think you have two sides to this story. The first one is that there are very strong tendencies, especially those aligned with the verdicts of the European Court of Human Rights, and those that are political manifestations of it, that are saying that Bosnia needs to move away from prototypical power sharing arrangement to consociational arrangement into more civic or civically organized state. They are always, invoking one person, one vote principle, always talk about individual rights versus collective rights, and they believe that this is the proper course in which country is supposed to develop. You have the other parties, mostly ethno-national parties, which are not in which have completely or diametrically opposed opinion about this, who are actually who have been capitalizing on the fact that the country is deeply divided, or politically at least divided, between three communities. That within these communities, actually, there are some democratic processes and contestation, but on the state level, it happens to be always that there is in a way an agreement of elites to run the country and how to run the country. So we have two different conceptions really about how this should proceed. And it's really difficult to say which one of these is taking us in the right direction, I have to say. First of all, because those who are advocating for civic state are at the same time saying that the civic state is also being hijacked by the Bosniak nationalist parties, and that they want to ensure that they have, through the numerical majority that they're enjoying after the results of the last census, that they would like to introduce the situation where they can basically command the majority of votes in a system which is based on one person, one vote. And these are the criticism coming from Serb and Croat parties. At the same time, we have their proposals which are calling for even bigger decentralization or deeper decentralization of the country. So, completely diametrically opposed tendency. But what we need to understand is that what we're dealing with are corrupt elites. Corrupt elites who are abusing offices and who have been abusing offices to enrich themselves. And everything else, I think, is secondary to this primary goal of establishing control over the public resource and using for personal purposes. The whole problem that we're having obviously isn't leading anywhere, because this is not a serious discussion. They are not talking about it, neither they are trying to resolve it.
Can Bosnia build a nationwide civic politics to replace the ethnic politics that dominates the country today, in your opinion?
I see. I mean, theoretically speaking, right? I mean, I can address this issue from scholarly perspective. When you talk about the power sharing arrangements, which are a result of certain conflict, and then you have to bring the parties together in a workable setup. The situation we're having is following. So we have three groups, right? And over time, these three groups should have worked together, and then in a way, all those things which are codified, which are about, making sure that nobody is going to be overvoted by the other two, is going to be gradually internalized, becoming a part of political culture. Over time, there would be no need for these codifications, because we would not make decisions that would jeopardize the one or the other group. And in this sense, we would build a trust, right? I'm talking about typical theoretical perspective. But we are actually far from this. So overcoming the power sharing arrangements requires really confidence building and trust between political elites and between peoples living in Bosnia. And we don't have that. So I think in practical terms, we are much more, or we are much further away from the civic state than we were, say, in 2000 or 2006 right now, with a very deep polarization, with demands for further codification of group rights. We are actually moving away from it.
You mentioned that you're talking about corrupted political elites. And actually, I wanted to bring into your attention the US, along with the UK sanctioning several officials, including Milorad Dodik, for corruption and threats to Bosnia's stability. I wanted to ask you, have these moves against organized corruption had any effect? Are they visible to Bosnia's citizens?
I guess there are two schools of thought there. I, for one, believe that this is the only remaining mechanism in the hands of international actors in Bosnia that should be used. And I think that sanctions are the right way to do it. Now, what I'm very much unhappy about is the fact that the US and the UK were actually isolated in this, were alone in this, because the EU did not follow. And now we have a problem, even though I think that there was plenty of room for the EU to use this mechanism as well. However, what happened is that in order to ensure that there is a unity over Ukraine, they moved the sanction mechanism from qualified majority voting into unanimity voting at the request of Hungary, which means that the Hungary, which also maintains relatively good relationship with some of the people you mentioned, such as Milorad Dodik, said that they will block any EU attempt to introduce sanctions. So we have a situation where the US and the UK are the only ones who are targeting these individuals. But for those sanctions to be fully felt, to be felt and to be fully implemented, what we need is the EU on board. Since we don't have that, we're talking about really limited impact in this sense. Now, I think that they actually hurt. And you can tell by the way they've been trying, especially Milorad Dodik himself, they've been trying to make sure that somehow he is removed from this list, regardless of anything he says in this sense. And he's constantly dismissing this and saying, I don't care, sanctions can't hurt me. I have nothing to do with the United States. But ultimately, I know that there are very serious, that there is some very serious lobbying being done in order to have these sanctions removed, because this also affects not only him, but now commercial entities that are related to him and his family, and it's beginning to hurt the business. And of course, you mentioned the question of corruption, which I think is the question number one. It's about that. Ultimately, really, it's about that. So what they're trying to do right now is to protect everything that and we're talking about the billionaires, really, the nouveau riche of post-war period and the transitional enrichment.
Will EUFOR mandate be extended in November? Are people worried about it now that basically the West is in war with Russia?
I wouldn't say that people are worried here. I don't think that anybody really understands much about what's been happening with the EUFOR mandate. What does it mean? Why is this so much of a problem? And what are the alternatives in case Russia decides to block the EUFOR mandate? But I know that this is being discussed and debated in a number of capitals throughout the Western world. To think about alternatives to this in case Russians really decide to block this. So I know that there are several options on the table. I'm honestly hoping that they will not block it, because that's going to be just another thing that is going to further complicate the relations in Bosnia. But in all honesty, Bosnia is still far from being a security threat, regardless of the fact that we're constantly talking about a potential war here or the renewed conflict. Regardless of what happens in November at the Security Council, the effects on Bosnia, the effects on Bosnia population are always going to be minimal. The reason is that people here truly suffer from very, very serious problems with the socioeconomic decline, leaving countries in country droves, and we have a problem with that. And that's the only reason why these issues don't actually matter that much.
How about the lack of decision from the EU to grant Bosnia and Herzegovina candidate status from the EU? Were people sensitive about that?
I think that we have a following situation. Honestly, I stand on the side of those who believe that we really did not deserve to be granted a candidate status. Now, given the fact that Ukraine was given and Moldova, that actually tells two things. The first one is that the enlargement process is in ruins, if you ask me. And now that this candidate status is not based on some substantial advancements and transformation of society, but has become a foreign policy tool of the European Union. I don't think that this perspective is realistic for both Ukraine and Moldova. So in this sense, you see that somehow the enlargement process has come to an end. But on the other side, Bosnia really did nothing to move on its path towards European Union. So I'm still very much on the side of those who believe that we need to change first and we need to adapt first before we are actually given or before this is recognized, and we are moving ahead on our EU path. In this sense, we did nothing, but I think it tells volumes about the health of the enlargement process as such.
And there are so many things and many other questions, but I'm running out of time. Thank you, Adnan, for talking to Balkans Debrief. We will be following the situation in Bosnia and having other episodes in our interview series. Thank you for watching us. Also, you can follow on Twitter at AC Europe and join our conversation by using hashtag Balkans Debrief.